everybody, welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Happy Friday to you. Boy, another week of explosive, fast-moving developments in Washington. If you're having trouble keeping up at home, well, sometimes so are we here at ABC News. We are going to break down some of those developments from the White House to Congress to even the Supreme Court today. The justices taking up an abortion case. It will be the first one for the new conservative majority on the court. We'll get to that. But first, where are we now after the first full week of House Democrats' impeachment inquiry into President Trump? And where are we headed now that the president himself just moments ago seemed to acknowledge he thinks Democrats now have the votes to impeach him?
So the Democrats, unfortunately, they have the votes. They can vote very easily, even though most of them, many of them, don't believe they should do it. And I do believe that because of what they're doing with Pelosi and their real leaders, AOC +3, that's their real leaders. I really believe that they're going to pay a tremendous price at the polls.
And we have full team coverage on this story this afternoon. Ben Gittleson joins us from the White House. Kira Phillips up on Capitol Hill. And our Patrick Ravel is reporting over in Ukraine. Of course, here at the room with me, our senior investigative producer, John Santucci, Rachel Scott, our campaign reporter, John. Going to start with you. So much happening so fast, I can't even get the words out on this Friday.
Go for it.
But let's focus on the president first and take just a big step back here. The conduct of this past week, not in dispute. In fact, the president doubling down, and this is just extraordinary. He has been brazenly insisting that it is okay for the president of the United States to use his office to ask foreign governments, now plural, to investigate his rival.
And in a weird way, as much as we should say the behavior of President Trump is no longer surprising, you do have to go back to the campaign trail and what he said in June 2016. It was a random press conference he called, I know because I was there, and he immediately comes out and says, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you can find Hillary Clinton's emails. Fast forward to where we are now. Think about that interview with George Stephanopoulos this past June, where he says that he would be fine with the foreign government giving information. Well, not only was he fine, he's now asking for it. So we obviously have the Ukraine example. That is where we get the telephone conversations that he had with the president there, inferring if you're going to do something with the Bidens would be great. But the thing that happened this week, Devin, I mean, there's no disputing. You can obviously, people could argue what's in a transcript, not there. But he is on camera, on the South Lawn, saying, you know what, China, go after the Bidens too would really be great for me.
It is extraordinary. It's raising a lot of questions about what's legal, what's illegal, what's wrong, what's right. Maybe even if it is legal, we're going to get into that with NYU professor Melissa Murray, who joins us from New York. But of course, hanging above all of this is the 2020 presidential campaign. The president is insisting all of this has nothing to do with politics, if you can believe that. Here he is earlier today.
I don't care about Biden's campaign, but I do care about corruption. His campaign, that's up to him. Politics, that's up to them. I don't care about politics.
What did you say to the Chinese about the Bidens, sir?
I don't know. Somebody said that a long time ago. Was that in 2017? I don't know. You'd have to tell me when. All I can tell you this. When I speak to foreign leaders, I speak in an appropriate way. If you notice, they don't mention the call that I had with the president of Ukraine. They don't mention that because it was so good.
All right, let's bring in Kira Phillips up on Capitol Hill. Kira, what struck me about that comment on the South Lawn today is the president now seems to be going after Joe Biden, not based on some evidence, quote unquote, that he has, that he wants investigated further, but he's asking these countries, China, to dig up new evidence. He wants them to find dirt on his political rival. Marco Rubio, a Florida senator, ally of the White House, says this is all a joke, but you're hearing from some lawmakers up there that they don't see it that way.
Well, no, they don't. And listen to the president. I mean, he's doubling down. He's trying to change the narrative here. He does this actually very well. And now Republicans are coming forward and lashing out at him. I mean, take a look at what Nebraska Republican Ben Sass said on Trump and China. He said, hold up, Americans don't look to Chinese commies for the truth. He actually said this in a written statement to the World Herald. He said, if the Biden kid broke laws by selling his name to Beijing, that's a matter for American courts, not communist tyrants running torture camps. And then Republican Senator Mitt Romney, he put out this statement: when the only American citizen President Trump singles out for China's investigation is his political opponent in the midst of the Democratic nomination process, it strains credulity to suggest that it is anything other than politically motivated. By all appearances, the president's brazen and unprecedented appeal to China and to Ukraine is to investigate Joe Biden is wrong and appalling. And you know what's interesting, when we just heard from the president there, and he said, you know, what he cares about is corruption. And I know John Santucci will want to weigh in on this as well. And that is, we're talking about the president of the United States, where allegations have already been made that he is using the presidency to profit. And so are his family members and businesses overseas. So it's very interesting to watch this duality of he's calling the Bidens corrupt, yet he has been accused of the same exact thing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, my friend Kira mentions the case that we're both obsessed with, and that is emoluments, and that is what has the president done, profiting off foreign countries, what's happening at the Trump Hotel in D.C. knows, as Kira and others have been reporting out, the amount of money that the Trump Hotel has made since it's opened, it has become, frankly, what is the swamp now in Washington, D.C. There are so many current formers and foreigners hanging out in the Trump Hotel lobby any day of the week.
And not to mention his children running his own business in foreign countries around the world as well. So a lot of parallels there. Rachel Scott, though, you'd cover the campaign. The president says this isn't about politics, but every indication from the Trump campaign is that this is a coordinated, orchestrated effort to take down someone that they have seen as their toughest opponent.
And this battle for impeachment, Devin, is coming at a time when the RNC and the Trump campaign have a war chest full of money. $308 million is what those two entities have raised just this year alone. $125 million in Q3. That's the most for any president. So we're talking about this battle as the president is going out on the attack, attacking Biden's. Well, his campaign is taking the cues. They are going to be launching ads this weekend in key early primary states, Iowa, New Hampshire, spending more than $1 million, all of it targeting the Bidens.
Trying to kick up a lot of smoke. Just this idea of raising questions about Biden, they hope will hurt him in some way. But Melissa Murray, I want to bring you into the conversation because a lot of people asking us on social media, we're getting the tweets, we're getting the Facebook comments. People want to know where the line is here. What are we talking about with the president's conduct, both with Ukraine and with China, asking these foreign countries to do some digging? Is it illegal? Is it just inappropriate? Help us break that part down.
Well, it's illegal for anyone who's participating in a public election of this magnitude to ask a foreign entity for help with that election. So if these allegations are true, that would surely be the basis for some kind of criminal charge based on the violation of campaign finance laws. As a general matter, though, and for purposes of impeachment, there is a much broader understanding of what high crimes and misdemeanors that the president may not engage in actually involve. And so the whole idea of impeachment is to crack down on abuses of presidential power, and the idea that the president might use the power of his office to pressure a foreign entity into doing his bidding surely seems to fall in that bandwidth.
And John, you've looked at this as Melissa talks about. Perhaps there was something legitimate to look into with respect to the Bidens. Maybe that there is an answer here as to why the president is doing this that could pass muster. And yet, a lot of people taking note of the fact that none of this went through the normal channels. In fact, you've been unable to confirm that whether the Justice Department is actually open to formal inquiry.
Right.
Why isn't the FBI on the case if this is so serious?
Right, and I think the most telling thing that we found in the moments, frankly, after the transcript of that call was released, how few people in the White House, in the administration, in the Trump orbit, knew that President Trump brought up Bill Barr on that call, the president's attorney general, the United States attorney general. That is not something anybody would have expected. Now, they knew what Rudy Giuliani had been peddling for quite some time. He's been working on this for most of this year. year, going over to Ukraine with some of his associates to meet with folks. But the fact that the president invoked the Attorney General of the United States and said, give Bill Barr a call, he'll help you with this, that was surprising to many, many people, and speaks also, Devin, to the fact that the checking of what the president is doing in the White House. We often talk about the guardrails that have been around him for quite some time. We are now in Act 3 of this administration. A different White House counsel that was there during the Russia probe, Don McGahn, often many people consider the hero that saved the president from himself. He is gone. You have a new team there. Did they try to stop him? Did they know about this? A lot of questions that we have left to get answers to.
And this comment today doubling down on the request of China so boldly and openly. This wasn't on a secretive call. This was in front of the cameras.
South Lawn.
Ben Gittleson over at the White House, the president says he has leveled no pressure against any of these foreign governments in these conversations, but we've obtained some pretty explosive text messages with respect to what the president was doing with Ukraine that do reveal a pretty coordinated, deliberate effort to try to leverage them to do this political work.
Yeah, last night we got our hands on a trove of encrypted text messages between 3 top U.S. diplomats for Europe. And they're from the past several months, and in them they discuss why hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. aid to Ukraine was being held up. Of course, we know that at the same time, President Trump was pressuring Ukraine to investigate corruption, including Joe Biden and his son Hunter. And there's several explosive exchanges, and in one of those texts, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, a man named Bill Taylor, said that, I think, quote, I quote, "I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with the political campaign." Now, the U.S. representative to the EU wrote back immediately, "I think you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind." And President Trump himself cited that message today to show that he said he's done nothing wrong. It's worth noting that the U.S. representative to the EU, a man named Gordon Sondland, who wrote that, is, unlike the diplomat in Ukraine, not a career Foreign Service officer and had donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee before he was appointed. That's just one exchange. And in another one, 2 of the diplomats discussed the promising Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, a meeting with President Trump if Zelensky would put out a statement promising to investigate corruption, the 2016 election, and a company tied to Joe Biden's son.
It's a complicated web. You're talking there, Ben, and the details, you almost have to read them. We do have the full text exchange at abcnews.com, but I want to bring in our reporter over in the Ukraine trying to unpack this on that end. Spoke to President Zelensky today. Patrick Ravel joins us. He's been doing great work. Hey, Patrick. So let's talk about what the Ukrainians are actually doing. The president wanted them to look into the Bidens. You heard Ben report about those text messages. You've learned today, though, that this new Ukrainian prosecutor is actually taking another look at some of the cases connected to the Bidens.
Yeah, so obviously, we've been talking about how the president has been pushing Ukraine to open an investigation into the Bidens, and today the prosecutor didn't do that, but what he did do is he opened a review into old cases involving a businessman who's connected to Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. Basically, his name is Mykola Zlochevsky, and he's an oligarch here. He's a pretty notorious oligarch, and what he does, he owned an energy company called Burisma. And Hunter Biden sat on the board of this energy company. And so what they've said today is that they are reviewing around 15 cases involving this oligarch, Zlochevsky. However, they also say that it doesn't involve Hunter Biden, and it doesn't actually involve the company that he sat on the board of. But obviously, it immediately raises this question of, has perhaps all of this pressure that we've been seeing put on the Ukrainians, is this somehow a response to that? And is this somehow a signal to President Trump that actually, yes, we are doing something? So as you said, I saw President Zelensky today. We were at an event. It was a big media event, and it was just a sort of scrum. But I managed to ask him and say, did you ask for this review to take place? And he turned around as he was passing and said, no, not involved at all. And then moved off very quickly, which is what we've been finding with him, that he's obviously trying to avoid giving much comment to us.
It's a complicated picture in Ukraine, obviously with a history of dissembling among the politicians there, corruption in that government, and now, as you say, they're reopening this. The timing is just bizarre. Patrick Ravel, thank you so much, John, because they seem to be, the Ukrainians seem to be trying to have it maybe two ways here, to sort of give nod to President Trump and what he wants, but also not alienate Democrats. Their statements have been very ambiguous. Patrick was alluding to that.
And very careful for that reason, right? Because we do have to see where this goes. Because from the Ukrainians' perspective, do they want to invest in Trump? Do they think that's going to be something fruitful, depending on where this impeachment inquiry is going to go? Or do they have to sort of become a little bit of Switzerland here and be careful, because we've got an election coming up next year, and obviously that could change who's going to be in command as well.
They insist there was no quid pro quo. The president insists there was no quid pro quo. Let's bring Melissa Murray back into this, because a lot of people wondering, Melissa, what the law says, what ethics might suggest. Does there have to be a quid pro quo for this to be wrong?
It doesn't necessarily have to be a quid pro quo for this to be wrong. It can be the case that the president has improperly used his position to do something with a foreign entity. So it doesn't have to necessarily be an explicit quid pro quo, but even just the suggestion that the office of the president is going to be used to withhold something, whether something else is of favor or value is given, can be enough.
All right, let's bring in Kira Phillips back into the conversation. Kira, meanwhile, as we unpack what's happening with respect to China and Ukraine, the investigation of House Democrats continues apace into the weekend. Today, they're holding a major interview with one of the central figures in all this, the Inspector General for the intelligence community. Tell us why this is so important.
Well, we're talking about Michael Atkinson, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, who received the whistleblower complaint at the center of this House impeachment inquiry. And that's video right there that you saw of him entering into the skiff this morning before members of the House Intelligence Committee, where he's been briefing. It's the first time Atkinson has testified before the committee since last week's public release of that whistleblower complaint. And he's appearing before the Intel Committee just a day after, you may remember, the former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, testified before several congressional committees about the administration's dealings with Ukraine. And that took about 9 hours. And we're about 6 hours in right now with Michael Atkinson. So, of course, we're going to follow that. And just before we got to this, I was looking through, I was alerted to an email coming out from Congress that the three committees seeking or investigating the whistleblower complaint right now are seeking Ukraine documents from Vice President Mike Pence. So as you can see, every day, pretty much every hour of every day, we're getting new information and new developments in this inquiry.
I see Kira's hour and upper by a minute. That's the way this is all going.
It's nonstop headed into the weekend as this thing is just going full bore. And Congress isn't even actually in session.
No, they're
right
out for
now.
another week. Can't wait for that.
Another week, and then they're back. Our thanks to Kira Phillips up on Capitol Hill, and of course Ben Gittleson at the White House. Thanks to Patrick Ravel in the Ukraine. Melissa's going to stick with us, guys. But I want to talk a little bit now about what impact this is having on the campaign as we head further into the fall. Public opinion going to be so important in this. We've shown some of the polls here, but today we sent our team out to talk to voters in different parts of the country about how they feel about just the developments of the past week and especially the president's conduct here. Here's some of what we heard.
I think it's a blatant disrespect to his oath of office. I think it's an impeachable offense, and I'm happy that we're finally moving forward with it.
Investigating, insulting, it's kind of all ridiculous in my opinion.
I think it's a ploy, as he's been using all along. I think it's a waiting maneuver. I think he's just trying to drag everything out as far and long as he can to change the conversation.
That's something that was similar that was happening with the Hillary, right? You just have to create a conflict to take away attention from you, from what you do wrong.
We probably shouldn't have other countries utilizing that kind of power for political gain to investigate other people that are going against us.
Rachel, how concerned are they about some of the skepticism voiced by these people we caught up with in the Trump campaign? Independent voters, sort of, are they concerned about that? They're always going to have their base in their corner. But what's sort of the mentality towards that middle ground?
Yeah, well, when I spoke to a Trump campaign official just this morning, I mean, they think that this is going to push this more in their favor, right? They think this is going to add to their fundraising calls and give them the ability to control the message. When we're talking about how much money they have to blast these ads, to really put the president's message out there, they think that will drive it home for even the moderate independent voters that are still on the line.
And the president's message, in a lot of cases, John, and some of this advertising they're spending money on is outright false.
Oh,
I mean,
it's not.
They're advertising in Iowa, in South Carolina, with ads about Joe Biden that have been debunked by every fact checker everywhere.
Yep.
And it's going to be tough to counter that.
It is, but to Rachel's point, speaking to several people close to the president involved in the campaign, there are two words. Sometimes it's one word, depending on how you write it. Witch hunt. Drill that home, drill that home, drill that home. Robert Mueller, witch hunt with the Democrats for the last 2 years. They couldn't get it, so now they're doing this thing. They have to keep that message going in their eyes in order to get through this. And they believe that the faster they get this over with, they can move on by it. And one thing that Trump officials believe is that most Americans in a couple of months might just forget about it. I personally don't think that's true, but they believe that they can get away from this and say, here it was again, folks, another witch hunt that we just had to survive. You've got to send me back. Drive that home. The other thing that they do need to be cautious of, and you got to look at the economic numbers from today, if the economy ever sways, that is the wall. That is the one thing that the Trump world knows they need to keep intact.
Indications that is slipping. Only 136,000 jobs added last month, much lower than economists expected. So a lot to discuss. Great conversation, guys.
Always.
John Santucci, thank you so much. Have a good weekend, John. Rachel Scott, we'll see you out there on the trail.
You too. Enjoy Iowa.
A lot of reporting to be done. Thank you both very much. To the Supreme Court now, where the justices began their new term this week with several major cases on the docket about gay rights, immigration, guns. The president very much front and center in all of this. The decisions set to impact millions of lives, stir up a lot of politics in this election year as well. Today, they added to their list of issues. They are going to take on a case involving abortion. This involves a Louisiana law that would restrict access to abortion, according to critics, requiring doctors in that state to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. I want to bring back in Melissa Murray, who, of course, knows the court very well, and also Ellie Schilling. She's a lawyer with Lift Louisiana. It's an advocacy group in that state. Thank you both for being here. Ellie, I want to start with you. For people not familiar with this Louisiana case, what's on the line? What is the court going to be looking at here?
Well, I mean, if this law were to go into effect, it would really have a devastating impact on abortion access in Louisiana. It would close most, if not all, of the clinics, which, just so viewers understand, there are only 3 clinics in Louisiana at this time. Laws like this and other actions that the state has taken has already caused most of the clinics to close. When this exact same law went into effect in Texas, then it caused about half of the clinics there to close. So the impact on access would be drastic and dramatic, and particularly then the impact on poor and vulnerable women in terms of wait times and drive times to access a clinic.
And Melissa, as Ellie was talking about there, this is notable because the law in question is very similar to a Texas law that the court struck down back in 2016. What does it tell you that the court didn't just issue a summary reversal here and say this case should go away? What does it tell you that they took it up?
Well, it's not just that it's similar, it is virtually identical. And even the Fifth Circuit, the court below, who decided this before it went on appeal to the Supreme Court, said so. The fact that the court has decided to take this up, even though it clearly violates established Supreme Court precedent from just 3.5 years ago, suggests that there are at least 4 justices on the court who are ready to call the question of abortion, and I think we have a pretty good idea of who those justices are. This, of course, will be the first outing for Justices Neil Gorsuch and Justice Brett Kavanaugh, both of whom replaced Scalia and Anthony Kennedy. Scalia was notable in his opposition to abortion, but Justice Kennedy was frequently someone that the liberals on the court could rely on to cast a vote in favor of upholding abortion laws that were overly restrictive. The fact that he's no longer on the court and we have these 2 new justices suggests that this is a very different day. And if this law is upheld, it will be an invitation to other states to continue legislating more and more restrictive laws, and the proliferation of these laws will surely happen.
And Ellie, supporters of this say this is really just about protecting women's health. They say requiring doctors in Louisiana to have admitting privileges sort of makes common sense. What's your response to that? What is so onerous about having doctors get these requirements, and why would it be a foregone conclusion that these clinics would shut down?
Well, I think it's important to understand that both the district court in this case and the Supreme Court in Whole Women's Health, which is the case that we've been discussing from Texas just three years ago, found that having admitting privileges does not add any medical benefit, that there is no medical necessity nor medical benefit to obtaining admitting privileges, because it does not actually improve any safety of the procedure, because women are able to get into an emergency room if they need to be admitted to a hospital, regardless of whether the physician who provides the abortion has a relationship with that hospital. And then the second point to your question, why is it difficult, is because there's a lot of controversy surrounding abortion, as we've been discussing. And so lots of hospitals are too nervous to grant privileges to abortion providers. They're worried about protesters showing up outside. It's also, there's no real benefit to a hospital because this procedure is so safe that these physicians are not going to be admitting patients into the hospital. So it just doesn't really make any sense for them. So hospitals are very unlikely and very unwilling to give privileges to physicians. And that was the point of this. That's the point. The point is to make it difficult for abortion providers to comply with this law in order to reduce the number of providers and clinics. And to Melissa's point from earlier, then, yes, this is a different court. The makeup of the court is different, which is concerning. And that's why the integrity of the court is really on the line here as well. If the only change in 3 years is the personnel on the court from a law that they struck down 3 years ago to a law now, then that really calls into question whether this court will be able to act in a nonpartisan way.
Yeah, and that court 3 years ago said it was an undue burden to have that admitting privileges requirement that you were talking about there. Melissa, very quickly, because we're almost out of time, big deal that this abortion decision will come down right in the heart of the 2020 campaign.
It's huge, and it's actually really surprising. Some had speculated, including myself, that Chief Justice Roberts was loath to take on a hot-button issue like this one during an election year. But again, all you need is 4 votes to grant cert, and even if the chief was unwilling to do so, he might have had 4 colleagues who were certainly willing to take on this barn burner of an issue.
A barn burner issue for sure. It's great to have Melissa Murray with us, as always, from NYU. Also, one of the co-hosts of the Strict Scrutiny podcast. A great listen. Thanks to Ellie Schilling with Lift Louisiana as well. Thank you both. And we're going to have a big special edition from the Supreme Court on Tuesday here in the briefing room, 3:30 Eastern Time. That's when the justices will hear a major case involving LGBT employment discrimination. Hope you tune in then. Great to have you with us today here in the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Hope you have a great weekend. Stay with us here on ABC News Live for continuing coverage on all these stories. And we'll be right back here on Monday.